The Second Coming of Don Quixote by Daniel Perley. Scroll 6. The Healing of the Maiden. The domestic tranquility of Jocelyn and Brandon's home, a meticulously maintained suburban dwelling in stark contrast to the Van Buren shelter, had been violently fractured by the diagnosis. Their 25-year-old daughter, Clarissa, a maiden recently married, was gravely ill with an aggressive form of cancer. She lay now in her childhood bedroom, confined by the fatigue and nausea of early treatment, her youth fighting a losing battle against the microscopic enemy. Quixote, the Knight of the Resilient Countenance, had been permitted access only because his sister, Jocelyn, was beyond the reach of rational thought, grasping at any form of spiritual comfort. Brandon, the police officer, watched his brother-in-law with weary suspicion from the hallway, his mundane reality utterly inadequate against this crushing tragedy. Quixote did not approach the sickness with hushed reverence. He approached it as a philosophical error, a manifestation of the world's chaos intruding upon the sacred order of the human spirit. He entered the room, which smelled faintly of sterile cloth and medicinal tea. Clarissa, pale and thin, managed a weak smile for her eccentric uncle. "Uncle Wiki?" she whispered, her voice reedy. Quixote did not bother with pleasantries. He stood at the foot of her bed, his large, intense gray eyes fixed not on her, but on some invisible, malevolent force hovering about her. He wore his familiar threadbare coat, which in the sterile room looked less like poverty and more like a monk's habit. "Maiden," he declared, his baritone resonating through the hushed room, "the ailment which assails thy noble frame is but a malady of the collective made personal. It is the accumulated spiritual debt of 1,000 generations seeking refuge in the innocent, and lent strength to prevail upon thee only by the unbelief of thy parents. But take heart, this has happened that he may believe." Clarissa's eyes widened slightly, accustomed to the comforting banality of medical jargon, not this pronouncement of cosmic injustice. Quixote then turned his attention to Brandon, who stood frozen in the doorway, clutching a cooling cup of tea. "Policeman," he boomed, using his brother-in-law's title as a challenge. "Thou dost enforce the laws of corruptible man, which punish the effect but ignore the cause. But I deal in the original ordinances, the laws of heaven that govern the integrity of the flesh and the spirit. This disease is merely a symptom of the cosmic imbalance, and I, the Knight of the Resilient Countenance, am here to restore the primary logic." Brandon shifted his weight, his knuckles white against the ceramic mug. He wanted to throw Quixote out, but the desperation in Jocelyn's eyes held him fast. Quixote then performed his action. He walked to the bedside with the confident stride of a man stepping on to conquered territory. He ignored the intravenous line and the blinking monitor. He focused entirely on Clarissa's pale, weak hand resting on the sheet. He gently covered her hand with his own. His large, rough hand, the same one that had cursed after hammering his thumb, now rested with perfect stillness and unexpected tenderness upon hers. Quixote closed his eyes. The serene, almost radiant expression that had momentarily transformed his harsh features during the car miracle now settled upon him. He did not pray aloud. He did not chant. He simply stood there, utterly still, concentrating not on her sickness, but on the profound idea of perfect health. The air in the room did not heat up or cool down, but it acquired a palpable density, a feeling of immense coiled energy. After a long, silent minute, Quixote opened his eyes. They shone with an unnerving, almost blinding clarity. He squeezed her hand lightly and withdrew his touch. "Maiden," Quixote announced, his voice now calm and authoritative, "the error has been corrected. The primary logic is restored. Go and be well." He then turned and strode past Brandon in the doorway, offering no explanation, merely a curt nod. "I have done my duty to the lineage," he stated to the stunned officer. "You may deliver the presidential coffee now, Brandon, if the office is functioning. If not, the debt is, as always, forgiven." And then he was gone. Brandon, breathing hard, rushed into the room. "Clarissa, are you okay? What did he—" Clarissa was sitting up. Her eyes were bright, focused. The fatigue that had shadowed her face for weeks was simply gone. She threw the covers aside, her movements sudden and strong. She pushed the IV pole away. "Brandon," she said, her voice clear and full of a startling youthful vigor. "Brandon, I'm hungry. I want a real meal. I feel—" She paused, flexing her hand. "I feel loud." Jocelyn burst into the room, having witnessed the encounter from the hall, her hands clasped over her mouth. The next day, Clarissa was driven to the hospital for her scheduled round of scans. The doctors, preparing for the next phase of grueling treatment, performed the necessary tests. They found nothing. The aggressive tumor had vanished. The cancerous cells were simply not there. The lead oncologist reviewed the images 3 times, then reviewed the historical images, then reviewed them again, his face a mask of clinical terror. Brandon, the pragmatic lawman, the skeptic who had scoffed at the presidential cupbearer and the epic quotes, stood alone in the hallway of his quiet house. He looked at the spot where Quixote had stood. He knew the coffee debt was only $3, but he felt an overwhelming, crushing obligation, a debt owed not to a man, but to a force he could not comprehend. The Knight of the Resilient Countenance had spoken, and the universe obeyed.